It's 2 episodes in 1. That's right, and today we're going to show you how to work with titanium and build a custom oil catch can. And it's only on the Fabrication series. That was pretty good. Yeah, not too bad yourself.
Thank you.
Yeah, you ever get the feeling like you're talking to yourself? Sometimes.
I know,
It's weird, it's strange, man.
Hey, I thought.
All right. Oh, whatever. Now, all of the titanium used in today's episode has been provided by Tycon Industries. Make sure you head over to tyconindustries.com and check out their really awesome selection of titanium fabrication components. Now, if you're not used to working with titanium, they offer a really fantastic sample pack that'll help get you started and comfortable working with titanium. Now, Tycon also ships worldwide, and every single part is expertly packaged and ready to use right out of the box. So let's get started on the first part of this episode in working with titanium. Now, if you've ever tried to research anything about titanium, you might find yourself extremely frustrated just trying to find a direct answer. And the reason why is because all of titanium is very, very specific to what it is that you're doing. It's not necessarily a one size, one grade, one this, one that fits everything that you're trying to do. So in fine TFS fashion here, I'm going to show you mostly what I know titanium in my industry and give you some examples of that and how we actually work it, along with the good facts and everything else like that, as easy as I can to present it and help you guys understand it. But do take note of one thing: my industry is automotive performance fabrication. So some of the things that I do here and some of the practices I'm going to show you on this one may not be applicable to other areas or other industries. And one thing in particular that a lot of people like to call me out on is changing the color of titanium or intentionally burning it. Now, I'll show you how to do all of that later, but the biggest thing, the biggest reason why they don't do it is because in other industries that is completely unacceptable, but in the automotive performance fabrication industry it has little to no effect on it or on the outcome or the performance of the titanium itself. So some of these things that you see me doing in here are applicable to this industry only, whereas they do not necessarily translate or work in other industries. And the best place to check that is within your industry technical specifications. There's usually job books, certain service requirements for each individual job that you're doing, and that's where the tech spec sheets are going to be shown, and that's where you get your answers on it. It's not usually found in some general searching because that's usually very opinionated, and there are not a lot of standards when it comes to actual titanium per application unless they're written on the job. So take that for what it is. But let's talk about some really interesting things about titanium. For one, it's actually one of the most abundant metals on the Earth's crust. But due to the fact that it's very difficult and lengthy to refine it and extract that titanium and actually create it, it's one of the most expensive metals out there. And that's part of why it is that way, because it takes so much to actually do it and to refine it to actually bring it out. But everybody typically knows titanium as being stronger than steel and stronger than aluminum. It absolutely is. It's generally speaking about 3 times the strength of steel and aluminum, depending on the grade that it is. But it's about 45% lighter than steel for the same strength properties on it. Now, when it comes to aluminum, most people know aluminum as being lightweight, titanium being lightweight, but which one of them is actually lighter? Well, it's actually the aluminum. Everybody thinks titanium's lighter, but it's actually not. It's about 60% more dense than aluminum, but more than twice as strong. Now, titanium has a really awesome service life on it, and it's not corrosive, and it actually doesn't react with just about anything other than the atmosphere when it gets to certain temperatures, but it does have a really good temperature range. We'll obviously get a little bit further into that. It melts somewhere around 3,000 degrees, and it's just generally speaking a really awesome metal to use for a lot of different applications. In fact, there's tons of them. Now, there's typically over 30 grades of titanium that are recognized and used, and they're broken down typically into 2 different types of categories. You got commercially pure titanium and your titanium alloys. Now, since there are so many, we're not going to break them all down, but I will tell you the top 2 used in each side. And the commercially pure side, it's commercial grade 1 or CP1, and on the titanium alloy side, it's typically 6Al4V. Those are your 2 most common types of titanium and grades of titanium in those 2 different categories. So let's get a little bit further into this one and talk about welding it. Now, generally speaking, titanium is an easy metal to weld and work with, but it does require a lot of attention and special practices. Now, first and foremost, it welds on DC current, just like steel, and the typical 1 amp per thousandth of an inch is a very good ballpark in which to set your machine up in. Now, some people like to weld it a little bit hotter, some people like to weld it just a little bit cooler. But it's really up to the welder doing the job. Now, the different machines are going to produce different results, different tungsten size, different tungsten grades, different everything. So it's best if you practice on some scrap metal to figure out which setting works for you. On my welder particularly, a 39 thousandths thick piece of titanium is usually best welded at 42 amps. That's my welder's sweet spot, but it's really up to you to figure out where that sweet spot is. Now, titanium is a reactive metal, and temperatures between 500 degrees and 1000 degrees Fahrenheit are typically where it reacts, and this is dependent on who you ask and what grade of titanium you're working with. But you do need to absolutely maintain a whole bunch of argon coverage, because somewhere between 500 degrees and 3000 degrees Fahrenheit plus, it needs to be shielded completely from the atmosphere, otherwise it will react and oxidize, which is not what you want with titanium. Now, a good full purge and pen weld is shown here, and you can actually see it looks like there's a weld on the inside as well as the outside. Now, by all laws and technicalities here, I do have a little bit more color than I really need to have on these welds, or that would be the standard, but again, this is the automotive performance fab industry, and these are actually passing. But you do need to make sure that you have a ton of argon gas coverage. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have the argon chamber when welding. You can actually get away with using a very large gas lens and a good purge setup. Now, you cannot get away with not shielding the backside of the weld as you weld it. So if you look carefully at this piece, the outside of it looks like a good passing weld, but the inside is actually ridiculously oxidized. And that happens so rapidly that it prevents the actual weld from penetrating through, because that oxide layer develops so quickly that even if you cook the everlasting crap out of it, it still won't actually puncture through. So you absolutely must shield your welds, as well as preparing them for a good solid weld. Now, preparation is also key to ensuring that you maintain a good solid weld. So let's just kind of have some fun with some of these titanium scraps here, and I'm going to smear this piece up really bad. I'm going to get all more oils on it, I'm going to get it on the rod, and let's just actually see what happens when we weld it without any preparation whatsoever. Now, it is very important to clean and prep your titanium correctly before welding. Now, some common practices include using a wire brush, a surface prep pad, or a carbide bit. Now, you should definitely be wearing gloves, and the final prep should be done with something like acetone or a similar degreaser to ensure that the part is nice and clean. Make sure you clean the welding rod as well. Now, by comparison, let's take a look at a well-prepped and shielded weld. Now, notice I am wearing gloves. A prep pad is also being used to clean it up, and I will give both the metal and the rod a good final wipe down before I weld it. Now let's take a look at the Furic BBW gas lens, which is also found at Tycon Industries. It provides plenty of gas coverage, and we can weld a lot faster in even more condensed area with less worry about the weld escaping the gas coverage. Now, one important note about coverage is that making sure that you have good pre and post flow before you begin welding. Now, if you don't have an adjustable post flow, or your post flow cycle is not long enough to actually maintain proper gas coverage while the weld is cooling, you can use a method that we call the double tap. Now, the double tap is by stepping on the pedal again to reinitiate the gas cycle before the post flow cycle expires. Now, the best way to find out how much time that is by taking some practice metal. Run a bead on it, see how long it takes for that metal to actually cool, and how many times you actually have to step on the pedal before the metal cools out of its reactive temperature range. And that'll tell you about how long it actually takes. On my machine, it's usually about 2 stomps and it's good to go. So make sure you practice, double check, do the double tap. Now, one last thing to note about titanium when it comes to welding is that titanium is often known as sticky when welding it, and this is the best way that I can show you how. Now, notice as I get the base metal up to temp here, I'm going to get the filler rod close to the puddle, and while it looks like it was a successful bond, let's take a closer look. filler metal actually started melting away before it was introduced to the puddle, which made it stick essentially to the base metal. Now the best way to avoid rod sticking is by practicing. You gotta make sure that you introduce that rod at a particular angle and directly into the puddle. Make sure it doesn't touch the base metal or anything around it, otherwise it will stick. Now when you're practicing, one good solid way to do that, or make sure that you get that correct angle, is by use of propping. You can prop your torch hand and you can prop the rod hand, and you got to make sure that it gets introduced the correct way every single time. You got to get a good rhythm going on it. That's really difficult to demonstrate and explain, but with enough practice you'll find that it actually is relatively easy to do. Just make sure that it's introduced at the correct angle directly into the puddle, not anywhere else around it. Just takes a little bit of practice. Remember, practice makes perfect. So let's talk a little bit about actual cutting of titanium, because that's actually relatively unique. Now there are quite a few ways to cut titanium, and most standard methods include using snips on sheet metal, using abrasives, you can use machining, you can use saws, you can use CNC, you can use plasma, all the rest of that stuff. But one quality that has to be noted about titanium is that it is not thermally conductive, meaning the heat will actually not disperse throughout the part. Instead, it will actually contain itself in a certain zone, and that zone is usually where the most friction is occurring. So using things like abrasives or even machining, it will actually contaminate itself if it's brought up to that reactive temperature, and that reactive temperature is actually very low. So doing things like machining, you actually have to machine at lower speeds with a whole lot of coolant flooding to keep the temperature down. Now, abrasive cutting and grinding is possible, but do make sure that you have a dedicated wheel for your titanium and you work slowly with it to keep the heat down. Now, since titanium is such a dense metal, consumables and tools will often see a short service life, which is why basic shapes are often cut with different methods such as CNC cutting. Now, CNC cutting with a laser or a plasma is also possible, but proper shielding gas such as nitrogen is required to keep the titanium from reacting, and this usually leads to a greater cost. Now, water jet cutting is also possible, but it does require a little bit of additional cleanup, and the greater possibility of contaminants being introduced, not of reactive contamination, is greater because of the actual water jet cutting process using an abrasive material. But either way, there's going to be a little bit more cleanup involved with water jet, and that famous water jet burn where it penetrates is also very difficult to remove from a titanium finish. So if you have anything with a really nice surface finish that needs to be maintained, water jet cutting may not be for you. But now that we have pretty much everything sorted out with titanium, you got a really good idea, let's actually start building something. It's time to get onto that catch can. In the second part of this episode, I'm going to show you how to build one. Now, it has been requested dozens of times for me to create a video on how to build a custom oil catch can, but there is actually a slight issue with doing that. There are actually thousands of designs. There are so many to choose from, including the unfortunate completely empty can. And there are a lot of really cheesy companies that make knockoffs of the big name companies that charge a lot of money for completely empty cans. Now, I'm not going to get too far into the details, and I'm not going to show you what's inside of a Merrill Performance catch can, but I will show you essentially how to assemble one, and I'll give you some information on it. Now, first and foremost, catch cans can be made in many different sizes, shapes, and designs. This includes anything from being round, being square, rectangle, polygon, dimensional, blown up, flattened. They can fit just about anywhere, and they can do just about anything. But there are some things that you really need to pay attention to with your catch can design. One, you definitely need some form of baffling on the inside to minimize the slosh. You don't want any of that crank waste to fill up and slosh around and blow out of the top or blow back into the engine, which defeats the purpose of actually having the catch can. The second thing is you really ideally want some sort of divider system to actually separate the two of them. Now again, there are so many thousands of designs on this one, and since the Merrill Performance catch cans took the better part of a year to engineer the perfect can that will not blow out or blow anything out of the top of it or back into the system almost no matter how full it gets, I cannot share that information with you, but I will show you exactly how to assemble one. And of course, with that information in mind, you can pretty much create your own design, and none of it will be wrong as long as it serves the proper function. So let's get on this one, and in the interest of saving time, I'm going to do it a little bit more like a fast fab episode. Check this one out. Now, the type of catch can that we're going to build for this episode is an atmospheric vented catch can. Now, the lids and the sheet metal being only 39 thousandths of an inch thick, we need to actually kind of thicken it up so we get that breather to fit in there, and I'll show you all about it in just a moment here. So we'll get a ring tacked on. Here's some behind the hood action, pretty cool. And I'm going to double these rings up here. Now I'm actually going to stagger these welds here. It's more for strength reasons, but as soon as we get them buzzed on here, I'll show you exactly why I am not welding it completely. Now check this out. I'm going to pry this up with a screwdriver here, and just to give it a little bit of a springy action and fill that gap in, so when we pop the filter back in again, it doesn't wiggle around. Now, having a filter kind of wiggle around there on such an expensive piece is kind of cheesy, so make sure that you give that some really good due attention. Now, any good catch can is going to have a drain on it, and at least it's a good idea to have one so you can actually service it in the vehicle. So I'm going to clamp it down to a piece of aluminum to disperse the heat well and minimize warping and distortion. And of course, the fact that it's flatly clamped down means that the atmospheric elements and gases can't access the backside of that weld. So as long as there's no warping and distortion, there's no way it can get back there, and the oxidation will not be there. So now we're going to get it cut down, and the bandsaw, this is very sped up, so make sure that you take your time on it and note that there's a lot of good flooding action on that bandsaw there. Now to get it cleaned up, I'm going to use a brand new flap disc. As always, let the flap disc do all the work, not your muscles, especially when it comes to titanium. Now the seam on the shell, I'm going to make sure that's placed face down, and when I'm going to use my jig here to actually mark it out, I like to splay the ports at 90 degrees. Now you can measure however you like and place them wherever you like, theoretically, depending on your catch can design, but if you want to splay them at 90 degrees, take the circumference of the tube, divide by 4, and that distance will be the distance from your ports. Now on drilling, this is real time here, not sped up. Notice I'm keeping a good flooding action, and that drill bit is swinging really slow to make sure that we don't cook the titanium. Now for prep work here, I'm going to hit it with a surface prep pad. Notice I have gloves on. This is where I'm going to do pretty much the base finish on it to make sure that the catch can is very uniform. Now after this point, I got to make sure that I'm giving it a lot of due attention and trying not to scratch it or burn it or get any oils on it. So of course a good acetone wipe down is a must. Now we're going to get it set up for our ports. Now these are 18mm threaded ports, of course available from Tycon Industries. Now the reason I'm using female ports here is future serviceability. Now consider that a titanium custom built catch can usually has a retail price of well over $1,000. You want to think future serviceability, so using female threaded bungs will allow you to change up the fittings and change the vehicle and change everything else about it. So that's why I'm using them. Now, Merrill Performance catch cans are actually sealed for life, and the internal structures of it are welded to the actual shell itself. So I'm taking this foil here, wrapping it around, inserting the purge line, and that will actually keep the outside of the shell from oxidizing when I actually weld it in there. Now, the can guts and divider and level sights and all the rest of the stuff are inside of that, and since it is a proprietary design by Merrill Performance itself, I'm not going to show you how I set it up. But as we mentioned earlier, it's not very difficult to come up with a design that works for you, but I don't share mine because they're still in production. So once those are in, we're going to get the lid set up. Now, just a handful of tack welds on this one because I'm actually going to weld it without filler, or I'm going to put an autogenous weld down on it. So lots and lots of tacks to minimize distortion and warping, and it's very, very important that you do, because all of these little tiny autogenous tack welds that we're laying down right now have to be perfect. Now, I'm using my foot to actually pulse the machine because my machine doesn't actually have a pulser on it. Now, if you have a pulser, it's a great idea. If you don't, pedal pulsing will work well. Just make sure that you have a nice, steady, and tight arc length when you're doing autogenous welds on titanium. Take your dear sweet time and make sure that the uniformity comes out correct. You don't want it too hot, you don't want it too cold. If it's too cold, it'll split. If it's too hot, it'll burn right through. So we get the top on, you get the bottom on. This piece is pretty much set, and we're going to give it just for another wipe down. Now, as mentioned before, cleanliness is extremely important, so never take any chances with it. We're going to get these ports buzzed on here, and to make sure that we purge it, I'm going to pop some foil inside of here, stick the argon line down to the bottom, give it a full-on pump and purge, and we'll get to welding the ports on. Now, of course, these are being done with filler, and again, you need to make sure that you maintain extremely good gas coverage, a very, very tight arc length, and one secret I can give to you guys, or one thing that I usually note about it, I don't weld very far on these before I actually reposition. So anytime I go out of position, I stop, let the part cool down, reposition, then weld again. So after we got them all welded up, we're going to give it one final wipe down and acetone. You can see one beautiful looking bare naked titanium catch can, and I am very, very proud of this one. I absolutely love the design of it. So take a minute to absorb that. That looks friggin' awesome. But really, what is titanium without all the awesome colors on it? In fact, if you're like me and you think that titanium is best represented or best shown with all its colorful action, then you'll love this step. If not, if you don't really care for burning or care for making colors, then just don't do it on your own can. So burning this is sped up about 600%, and it takes a while to actually get to burning it. Now I do have other videos on working with titanium, and I go over the burn process pretty thorough, so definitely check out that playlist. But the important thing to remember here is to stop burning before you hit your color, and it does take a while to do, so make sure you practice. Now for the piece de resistance, the brand tag, and this is the first time that Merrill Performance has ever shared a logo space with any other company, and I am extremely proud to share that space on this particular product with Tycon Industries. This is a fantastic product, and I am absolutely happy as can be to have the opportunity to make this one-of-one product in the entire world. So when it gets to putting this brand tag on here, I'm going to take my time, measure it up, get a good tack weld on there. We're going to double check, don't even mess around, and make sure it's nice and straight. And we're going to pop another tack on there. Now this C-clamp looks a little bit overkill, but in all honesty, the ductility of titanium at even 39 thousandths of an inch thick is not very much, so that C-clamp is actually necessary. So after we get all of our final welds on here, the catch can is complete. And now we get to see who gets to claim this and take it home and put it on their own ride in the Tycon TFS giveaway. Wait a minute, hold on a minute. Did I literally just say that we're going to give this catch can away? Yes, I actually did. And if you follow at the.fabricator on Instagram, my personal profile, and Tycon Industries, you would have found out about this competition weeks ago when we actually did it. It's an Instagram-only giveaway. Now, the rules were extremely simple. All you had to do was submit a video entry as many times as you like, explaining why you want this catch can, why you need it, or why it's best, or why you anything. Just submit that video entry, put it up there as many times as you like. And it took a lot of tough deciding, and there were a bunch of entries that got into this one, but I finally found the winner, the moment you guys have been waiting for. Now, through all of the entries that were submitted through Instagram since we launched this contest, there is one that definitely stood out among the rest, including everything from sliding his car around, showing his car off, and even sliding around the office in a desk chair playing Drift-O King. I'd like to give a big congratulations through all 6 of his entries to Justin, aka Boo40SX. Congratulations on your Tycon Industries Merrill Performance Catch Can win.
I was dreaming about this last night. I can't even tell you guys how excited I am. Tycon, you guys are absolutely killing it. Fabricator does some of my favorite work. I'm so excited. Shout out to all my drifting buddies.
You know I built that, right? Surprise. Congratulations. Congratulations. So another big shout out to Justin, and congratulations for winning that catch can. He submitted the most video entries, had the most creativity, and he seemed to really want it the most out of everybody else, and that's really awesome. So congratulations once again. Now that about wraps it up for this episode of Working with Titanium and Building a Custom Oil Catch Can. And I want to thank you guys very much for watching as always. Now don't forget to subscribe to the Fabrication Series YouTube channel to check out some more really awesome content. Now you can also follow along at the fabricationseries.com website. Hit me up on facebook.com/thefabricatorseries, and of course Instagram at the.fabricator. Now all of that information is down there below in the description, so make sure you check it out with all the links and everything you need to do it. Make sure you also check out some of these videos, and above all, definitely head over to TyconIndustries.com for all of your titanium fabrication components. Now before I get out of here, I'd like to drop one more big shout out and very respectful thank you to Tycon Industries for allowing me the opportunity to do this episode and create this really awesome one-of-one product in the entire world. Really great. Fantastic working with you. Thank you guys very much. We'll see you all on the next episode.